All right, good afternoon, everybody, and I want to thank you for joining us for the Careers and Criminal Defense panel. I'm going to introduce you to our speakers. We have representatives here today from the Federal Public Defender's Office in Portland. We have the Alaska Public Defender Agency and the Lane County Public Defender's Office or Agency. Office, sorry. First, I'm going to introduce you to Renee Mans. Did I pronounce that right, Renee?
It's actually Manus.
Manus. My apologies.
No problem.
In law school, Renee interned with the Roxbury Public Defender's Office. After law school, she did some clerkships and took a brief foray into standard law practice at a couple of civil firms, including founding a small woman and minority-owned law firm. She wanted to return to criminal law and has always only worked in defense. In 1996, she was one of the founding attorneys at the Capital Habeas Unit in the Central District of California, which was one of the first CHU units formed in the Federal Public Defender's offices. In 2004, she moved to the Federal Public Defender's Office in Oregon. She graduated from Northwestern University and earned her JD from Harvard Law in 1986. Welcome, Renee. Next, I will introduce you to Connor Hughesby. Did I get that right, Connor?
That is correct. Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Connor graduated from the University of California Hastings College of Law in 2006. He returned home to Oregon after law school and served as a state public defender for 11 years at the Metropolitan Public Defender's Office, where he was the head of the office death penalty unit. In 2017, he moved to the Federal Public Defender for the District of Oregon in Portland, Oregon. He spends approximately half his time doing federal death penalty work and the other half working on non-capital federal criminal cases. Welcome, Connor. Okay, next we have Sharon Barr. Sharon's with the, she's an assistant public defender for Alaska Public Defender Agency, and she's tuning in to us from Alaska. Sharon is originally from the East Coast, DC area, and graduated from Northeastern University School of Law in Boston in 1990. In 1989, she interned at the Alaska Office of Public Advocacy, which is the agency that handles the cases that the Public Defender Agency has conflicts with. She fell in love with Alaska and realized that public defense was her calling. After graduation, she clerked for a year with the Alaska Court of Appeals. Sharon has been in indigent defense since 1991. First as a felony trial attorney, and since 1998 as an appellate attorney. She also hires all the interns for the Public Defender Agency. Welcome, Sharon. Thank you. And next we have Zara Lukens. Did I get that right, Zara? Okay.
Yes.
Great. She's an attorney for Lane County Public Defender's Office. Zara joined Lane County Public Defenders in October 2018. Prior to becoming a public defender, Zara was a law clerk for the U.S. District Court of Western District of New York. In August 2015, she was a judicial clerk to Justice Martha Walters. Zara graduated from the University of Southern California and earned her JD from Harvard Law in 2015. She is currently the law clerk supervisor for her office. Welcome, Zara. Okay, why don't we start off and hand it over to Connor and Renee to talk to you guys a little bit more about their journeys and the Federal Public Defender's Office.
Do you want to start, Connor, or
Sure.
should I?
So I was kind of lucky because I went to law school knowing what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do criminal defense, and to the extent they allowed me, that's all I studied. I avoided contract law and property and wills and trusts and those sorts of things as much as I could. Took a lot of classes on trial skills and just criminal law in general. Did two separate sort of clinics. One was a summer clinic with the San Francisco Public Defender's Office, and then I did Hastings has a really good sort of like trial skills clinic where you work for the semester for a local public defender's office and meet weekly and learn more trial skills. And so I worked for 6 months for the Marin County Public Defender, which is just north of San Francisco, and loved that. And then moved back to Oregon. I actually initially worked for, when I came back to Oregon, MPD, the main public defender's office in Portland, didn't have any openings, but the public defender's office in Pendleton, Oregon did. So I went out there for a year, and then MPD called and said, we have an opening, we'd like to hire you. So I went to MPD and spent most of my time initially doing Measure 11 felonies, which are things like rapes, robberies, serious assaults. And then in 2010, around that time, started doing exclusively death penalty work. And I did that for about 7 years in the state system, and then moved over to the federal public defender system. So that's sort of my career path. I've loved every moment of it. I think criminal defense, I don't think I could practice any other kind of law without getting bored. It's a wonderful career. It's very rewarding. The clients and you meet are all interesting and wonderful, and the stories are wonderful. And it's just a great career to have if you want to do that. So that's sort of my path. I'll let Renee talk about her path, and then we can talk about what our office offers.
So my path was a little more traditional. I remember when I was in criminal law, my first year criminal law professor telling us that statistically more of us in my Harvard Law School class would end up being criminal defendants than would end up being criminal lawyers. And of course, I was in a very corporate law school, and around me was very corporate DC administration, Federalist Society lawyers. So it was interesting that I was far more interested in criminal defense, and I interned with the public defender's office in law school. But then when I graduated from law school and after clerking, I took a detour into the civil world. And while I started with defense law firms, I ultimately founded with a partner a small law firm. We ended up, I think, 5 attorneys was the most that there were of us. And we primarily started with employment petition or plaintiff law. So we were suing big corporations for discrimination, harassment, sex, race, age, those types of issues. And we did very, very well. And then unfortunately, those large corporations like McDonnell Douglas and Wells Fargo and Bank of America learned that they could put us on retainer, and then we couldn't sue them anymore. And they'd give us a few cases and we wouldn't end up suing them. And we ended up transitioning to a much more defense-orientated employment law firm. And that was not what I had ever seen myself doing. And I'd always wanted to get back to criminal defense. And I started looking around to get back to criminal defense, and they were forming what are called the CHUs, or these capital habeas units. And capital habeas is your client has been sentenced to death in federal court. They've been sentenced to death usually by the state system. They have already been through the direct appeals. They have already been through whatever collateral challenges the state system offers, and they're into federal court. And in federal court, you have them from the filing of their federal petition basically through the completion. You either prevail, or you keep the case going, or your client is executed. And capital habeas work is nothing but complex civil litigation. And I had been doing complex civil litigation and suing major law, major companies and defending against huge law firms. So when they started this unit, they brought in many individuals who were criminal trial lawyers, and I'd had trial experience, but only civil trial experience. And then they brought in a couple of us that were, complex civil litigation specialist. I could write a 300-page capital habeas petition. I could respond to 500 motions to dismiss. I could respond to procedural bar motions. I could do that type of work and analysis. And I really loved that work, and I did it pretty much exclusively for 8 years, but lost the ability to really appear in court, the ability to do trials, to have cases that moved and resolved. I mean, you really don't want your capital habeas case to resolve, because most of the time when it resolves, you are losing, and we lost a couple. So I asked to get back into a balance of indictment level cases, which is federal trials, and then after 9 years in LA, the Oregon office was beginning to have gentlemen on Oregon's death row enter into the federal capital habeas practice, and they didn't have lawyers to do that. So they went out and were looking for lawyers who had this capacity, who would be willing to come to Oregon, and not only willing to do the capital habeas cases in Oregon, but also had the ability to do trial level cases. So they hired me, and my practice includes indictment level cases, federal capital habeas cases, and also some non-capital habeas cases as well. And while I loved some of my civil practice, and I won't deny the fact that I made more money in my civil practice and paid off my law school loans, and those were good things, I don't make bad money in the federal public defender's office. I certainly make a living wage, more so than many attorneys, and it is work that I love and believe in. My son always said that I found, the best possible job for me, which is that the government literally pays me to F with the government. And I'm happiest when I have the opportunity to F with the government, and being paid by the government to do so is just icing on the cake. So, and like Connor, I've never had any desire to be across the aisle. That's just an anathema to me. No desire to do that. So in terms of our office, we do hire law students. It has been the case that the federal public defender generally has not hired out of law school. They tend to hire individuals who have had years of practice. I think that can change. It does change in different offices. One of the attorneys in our office went directly to North Dakota out of law school, and then we hired him like 4 or 5 years later. And in his interview, somebody asked, "How did you get hired by an FPD right outside of law school?" And he said, "Well, it was North Dakota." And that there's some truth there, but there is a push to get some new blood in our office, and I think offices that are federal public defenders offices are always interested in looking at qualified candidates. I will say, and I'm sure Connor will back me up, it's a different type of practice. If you want to be a trial dog and get your trial skills, that's on the state side. When you're a state public defender, you're in trial far more frequently, far more often, and you're really honing those skills. Federal criminal defense is much more written practice, a lot more motion work, a lot more appellate work, just a lot more analysis in on the paper type of litigation. Not that we don't have trials, and I have had trials, several trials in the last, I've been here since, I've been here almost 20 years now. So I have had trials, but you're not going to get that as much in federal court. And that's why a lot of our individuals who are really good trial lawyers are like Connor, who had so many years in state court and really honed their trial skills. Because trial skills are like any other thing. You've got to do it. You've got to be in the moment. You've got to be the repetition of what's the objection? How do I say it? How do I frame it? Over and over and over again until you're really, really proficient at it.
Yeah, so we, echoing Renee's comments, we hire law clerks pretty much year round. We have them all the time. It is the law clerks at our office largely do research and writing, because that's what that's just sort of what we do a lot of. But you get to work on some fascinating issues with some really good attorneys, and you get to hone your writing skills. That's certainly something I wish I was better at when I was in state practice. The other thing is, I'll give a plug for NPD because I worked there for 11 years. They hire law clerks all the time too. They do, and in NPD, when you're a law clerk there, you can become what's called a CLS, a certified law student, which means that you are authorized to appear in court. You have to have a licensed attorney in the courtroom with you, but you're pretty much acting as an attorney and having your own clients and conducting trials and doing all that. So, I would encourage you guys, if you're interested in a career in public defense, to, explore both state public defender clerkships, whether it's in the summer or if your law school has clinics that happen during the semester, at both the state and federal levels. Like I said, they provide different skill sets, but both are equally as valuable. I wish I could go back into state court now with some of the writing skills and sort of minute legal analysis I've learned as a federal public defender, because I think I'd be a much better attorney in state court. And so, trial skills and writing and skills are both important things to learn. And the federal defender, I think, is the best place to learn those sort of writing and sort of very intense legal analysis skills. And state public defender's offices provide a little bit more of the trial skills experience.
Thank you both very much. Why don't we move on to Sharon? Sharon, will you talk to us a little bit about your career path and your office and the opportunities for students there?
Sure. So like you said in my introduction, I'm originally from the East Coast. I am a person who went into law school not knowing what I wanted to do. I thought maybe, I knew I wanted to do something public interest oriented. I didn't know what that thing was. I went to a law school, Northeastern, where you do 4 internships during your second 2 years. So it's a little different program. So I came up to Alaska in the end of February 1989 on a lark, honestly. It was sort of like, when else will I go to Alaska? And I decided to try public defense really on a lark, just why not? And I fell in love with it, both things. With criminal defense, I think it's real. And I think that's primarily why I like it. It's about real people who do real things, and you can actually really help that person. And there's always something in that person that you can find to relate to and to draw you to them. And on the appellate level, it's interesting. It's all constitutional law, which I think is really interesting, and evidentiary issues, which I think is really interesting. And every case I get has some new problem where I think, wow, I don't know the answer to that. But it's very intriguing. I've had the opportunity, although I've been doing appeals for a long time now, during that time, I've had the opportunity to take breaks and fill in for other staff lawyers who go on maternity leaves, or, sometimes we get to go to other offices and live there for a couple of weeks if they need someone to fill in while someone's on vacation. So I still find myself in and out of the trial courts and doing remand hearings, or if I win something on appeal, going back to the trial court. I will say one thing to consider when you do careers that I think is pretty important, I thought about this early on in my career, is the environment you work in is actually going to be just as important as the work you do, because you could be doing the most interesting work in the world, and if the office environment is bad, you're going to leave. And one thing I will say about our office, I actually haven't been in other public defense offices, but I think it's very much the same. When you get underdog work, it tends to be very bonding. And I have always, I will say I actually love my colleagues. I feel like they're just, it's just a different environment, and it's very supportive because you're all working against the system, and that there's something very nice and very bonding about that. And I totally agree with Renee Manis about the joy of being paid by the government to fight the government. Who would have thought? That's just so great and so fun. And I've never worked on the other side. I can't even imagine. I will say the world needs like good and ethical prosecutors. It's just, I'm not going to be one of those people. Um, so yeah, so that's a little bit about my path. And I've only ever been in the Alaska Public Defender Agency, or actually I was in the Office of Public Advocacy before that, but I've only been in the Alaska system. Just to tell you a little bit about our agency, we are a statewide public defender agency, which is different than what happens in Oregon and California, actually. We're a very small population state. There's only 730,000 people here. So we have one state agency and we have 13 offices around the state and about 100 some odd lawyers amongst all those offices, but we're all state employees. So it's like one big law firm split into 13 parts. We represent criminal defendants in misdemeanors and felonies and at all stages of the process. We also do a discrete amount of civil law. So we represent parents when the state takes custody of their children because they think the kids have been abused or neglected. And we represent juveniles in delinquency cases and persons in mental health commitment proceedings. And that might be a little more unusual than other places. And I also will say to mirror something that Renee Mann said, that we also, I've always also had a living wage. It's not a problem. I get to travel outside of the state when we're allowed to do those things and there's not a worldwide pandemic. And it's fine. But in terms of hiring, every summer, well, first I should say we have interns or externs throughout the academic year. We don't have any law schools in Alaska. So we tend to not have as many people during the traditional academic year. Once in a while, we get people who come up to extern and we love that and we are open for that and it would be fantastic. But we have a very robust summer intern program. Every summer I hire 20 to 24 interns to go amongst our various statewide offices. We only hire 2L interns because similar to what you have in Oregon, we have a student practice role. So if a student's completed half the coursework required towards graduation, we can get you a student practice permit from the Bar Association and you can go into court and represent clients on your own. So most of our interns, no matter what office they're in, have their own misdemeanor caseload, which is actually, each case is actually assigned to a staff lawyer, but the student is responsible for working up the case, reading the discovery, drafting any motions, doing any hearings. For evidentiary hearings and trials, there has to be another lawyer present. So it's a very challenging and rewarding internship. And students actually tend to love it because, among other things, I don't know why anyone wouldn't want to come to Alaska for the summer. It's just like fantastic here in the summer. I think in the winter too, but definitely in the summer. And we also like it if interns can second chair trials when they're up here. And the only reason that doesn't happen is if all the trials fold. This year, I've already hired 20 interns, but I still have 2 openings. And what I will say about this summer is I don't know what's happening in Oregon, but our state courts have not done any trials since last March. So I think it's possible that by this summer, if jury trials start again, it's going to be completely insanely busy. At the beginning of all this, we thought, oh my God, no trials for a month. And we thought that was going to be insane. And it'll just be interesting to see what happens. But I will say, if you seriously want to be a public defender, you should come intern in Alaska because you're probably given more responsibility than you'll get anywhere else in the country. And the other thing is, usually every year around October, I send around an email to all the staff lawyers just to see how many people started out as interns. The last time I did that, which might have been 2019 actually, was about 30% of the people on staff started out as interns. So if you end up wanting to work for us, it's a good in. We hire new lawyers every year because we are a state agency and that's kind of what happens. And if you don't want to end up wanting to work with us, you've still got pretty fantastic training. Anyway, so that is it. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharon. All right, Zara, can you talk to us a little bit more about your path and also Lane County PD's office and the clinic with our school?
Sure. Yeah, so I went to law school knowing I either wanted to do public defense or legal aid. I did a 2-year legal aid clinic that started at the beginning of my 2L year. Knowing I was going to do that, I decided to work at a public defender's office my 1L summer. I worked at Metropolitan Public Defender, and I knew as soon as I set foot there, I pretty much knew I was sold on public defense. I think it is the best legal career. It's rewarding, it's inspiring, it's always interesting. I don't think there's any better area of law, but some might disagree. I also, like a lot of others have described, tried to take as many criminal law related classes as I could. And then my 2L summer, I interned at the ACLU Capital Punishment Project to try to get a feel for some other kind of non-trial level work, and that's more post-conviction type of work. It's very different than trial level public defense. We interviewed jurors from the original trial. We did a lot of mitigation interviewing in Mississippi, and so that was very interesting, but a lot different from what I do now. I will say that if you haven't taken any criminal law classes except the one that you're required to take, don't worry about it. You can become a public defender even if you don't realize until after you graduate that's your area of interest. So don't stress too much about that. But if you do know you're interested in public defense, I think the summers are probably the most important. You can really delve in and get a good feel for what it's like, although we do have non-summer opportunities as well. And so after graduating, I did a clerkship at the Oregon Supreme Court because I wanted to hone my writing skills. I think a lot of times people don't emphasize writing when they talk about trial work, but it really is important to be able to write a motion and memo well and convincingly. Trial courts are really busy, and if they get a chance to read something that you've written and it makes sense, and they read it before you even set foot in the courtroom, I think that's really helpful. Versus if you're already in the courtroom, many judges have such a busy docket, they may be already thinking about the next case they have to hear. So I think it is important to work on your writing skills. And then I did a federal court clerkship mostly for location, so I could be near my partner and get a job for just a year. So that's what I did. And after that, I came and started working at the public defender's office here in Linn County. So Public Defender Services of Linn County is the public defender's office in the county. There's also a defense consortium of attorneys who, many of them do private retained work, but also public defense contract work. And so they're the other group of public defenders. Our office is the only office where the attorneys are full-time public defenders and we all work in the same space usually. We have 25 attorneys in the office, and we always have a smattering of law students doing various things. So we have a defense clinic that's in the fall. I think it may be coming back in the spring. I believe it's going to be this spring, but I don't want to misspeak. There is a clinic, so if you're interested in that, that's a great way to get credit and get to do a lot of casework in our office. We also have externs. We have one extern this spring, and we had a few last spring, so it just depends. But if that's something you're interested in, we can always work in externs in the fall or spring. And then we have law clerks, and those are paid positions during the school year. We have 3 law clerks right now. They do various things for us, like they do non-routine expense requests. So if an attorney needs to hire an expert to do work on a particular case, the attorney will write up the information and a law student will fill out the non-routine expense request and submit that for us. They also do discovery review, so reviewing body cam footage, listening to jail phone calls, summarizing that stuff for the attorneys, and then they work on research and writing motions, like motions to suppress, and any other kind of motion that might come up. So it's pretty varied. We have a summer program as well, and this summer we're looking to hire at least 2 to 3 students. We like to have roughly 4 summer students equally split between Rising 2Ls and Rising 3Ls. So we will probably be hiring at least 2 to 3. Oftentimes students who work their 2L summer will want to come back well, their 1L summer will want to come back and work their 2L summer. So we frequently have repeat summer students. And then most often the law clerks, the paid school year positions that we hire, are people who worked for us during the summer. And then they decide they want to stay in as a law clerk. And the law clerk positions are usually 5 to 15 hours a week, depending on the person's availability a particular week. And then our summer position is typically full-time. I did submit a posting to Simplicity. So I'm not sure if that's live yet, but we'll be accepting applications for the summer positions as soon as that's live, or and that has my email, but you can also just email me your information as well. You should be able to find me if you search my name and Public Defender Services of Lane County. I want to plug the summer. For a while, we didn't have summer positions, but the last couple of years I've supervised the summer law students. I think it's a really great way to get a feel for what it's like in the office. Last summer, granted, people didn't get much of a feel for what it was like to work in the office, but despite working from home, the students did really great work for us. We had students write so many motions to suppress for us. We had a student draft a Brady motion that we're now filing in a lot of cases. It's really nice because the students can come in and write something that's really involved and very helpful, but that an attorney who has a high caseload and is really slammed all the time might not have the time to sit down and write in the way that a law student can over the summer. So we love having the students, and we try really hard to give everyone a diverse range of tasks to work on. In a typical summer, when there's court happening in person, we also really encourage the students to spend a lot of time observing in court, seeing whatever you can see. We want people to know what all the different types of hearings and proceedings look like. And if you're court certified, you can carry your own small caseload and stand up in court. But that depends on court certification, of course. So yeah, we love having summer students. I think it's a great program. We try to make sure students get a lot of autonomy and tasks to do that require you to just jump in feet first, because I think that's what public defense is really about. Maybe it's not ideal, but the reality of the situation is a lot of it is kind of trial by fire, and you jump in and you do stuff that you're not that comfortable doing. And I think having a summer experience that gives you a taste of that is really helpful in letting you know if that's what you want to do, if you want to do public defense, or if maybe private criminal law is more your speed. But we encourage all of you to apply. I think the application I believe I said on the posting that it's open until March 1st, and then we'll be letting people know by March 15th about interviews. So yeah, please apply and ask any questions that you have during the question and answer period.
Thank you so much, Zara. I'm just going to ask one or two questions, and then I'll open it up to student questions. And one question I have for you that comes up a lot in all sectors, but students often want to know what qualities and skills are you looking for when you review law clerk applications? And if in your answer you could touch on kind of what students who don't have because a lot of our 1Ls are taking criminal law and they just started on Monday, but what students who maybe didn't take criminal justice, I know some undergrads have courses and they've gotten a taste, or maybe they've interned already. For students who don't have any experience in criminal law but do have an interest in criminal defense, what you think would be helpful for them to focus on when they're expressing their interest. So Zara, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think when I'm reviewing applications, I'm looking for either in your cover letter or in your experiences listed on your resume, something that shows that you're interested in public service work. I think our line of work isn't that different from legal aid or a lot of other kinds of public interest type of jobs, that we want to serve underserved populations and work with people who don't always maybe get the best legal representation, but who deserve it. So that's what we're looking for, a commitment to that and an interest in in working with people one-on-one and basically using your law degree to help people. So that's the main thing.
Thank you, Zara. Renee?
And I'll say, I was a philosophy major undergrad. If anything, when I see criminal justice, my impression of a lot of those college level courses is that they are prosecution orientated versus defense orientated. I tell high school students and college students that I talk to that if you really want something that will help you to be a criminal defense lawyer, major in psychology and abnormal psychology, because that's one of the things you're going to be dealing with a lot as a criminal defense lawyer. And what I think we look for is dedication to public service and ability to deal with individuals who are not at all like us, who come from or not at all like me and many of my colleagues, come from very disadvantaged backgrounds and usually have pretty exceptional mental health issues and are struggling with trauma and are struggling with being very marginalized and having been raised in a very marginalized environment. So a dedication to those individuals, whether it comes with the criminal justice overlay or some other issue, is something that we're looking for. And then we look for creativity. A lot of what we do, particularly in federal criminal law, is law in motion, but creative law in motion. Our office has a huge number of protester cases, and we spend a lot of time brainstorming what are attacks on these cases, what are attacks on these laws, what are attacks on these theories. So creative writing is something that's also very, very interesting to us. Connor, do you have anything to add?
No, I tend to agree. I think a real dedication to serving the population that we serve is something that we look for. I think if you come in and you're just sort of like, well, I'd like to do some sort of work in criminal law. I don't know if I want to be a prosecutor or a defense attorney. I'm just not sure. You're probably not going to stand out amongst other applicants. At the Federal Public Defender's Office, there's certainly strong writing skills we're looking for. So, a really strong writing sample can get you a long ways. And then, a love of learning, a willingness to work hard, those sorts of things. When I don't make hiring decisions at the Federal Public Defender, but I did at the State Public Defender when I was there. And I always like to see people who are competitive too. That's always helped me. Part of this job is it's going to be difficult at times, especially when you're just starting out and you have tons and tons of cases and you're overwhelmed and stuff like that. It can get disheartening. But I've found that a lot of the best public defenders are sort of obnoxiously competitive, like myself, because it gets you through. No matter what's going on in my job and how difficult it is, there's always my sort of pathological desire to win that will sort of help me push through the difficult times. So I think those sort of things, competitiveness, a dedication to public service, and specifically the types of people we serve, and at least for the Federal Public Defender, very strong writing skills are what we look for.
As opposed to competitiveness, I'd say you can't be a shrinking violet and be a good public defender. There are times when you are going to be yelled at by judges, by prosecutors, by the press. How on earth can you defend these horrible people? And sometimes by your clients. And you have to have the backbone to take that and to keep doing what you know is right and needs to be done, and keep speaking truth to power without, I've had judges threaten to hold me in contempt, and I'm like, yeah, go ahead. Fine.
Thank you. Sharon, do you have anything you want to add?
When I review cover letters or resumes, I'm really, the main thing I'm looking for is some sort of public interest, public service interest. I mean, for most 2L students, like I said, some people have known since birth they want to be a public defender, and their resume is filled with that, but many people don't. So just something that would indicate to me that a student cares about other people who are in need, and that's their focus. And even short of that, I mean, I have to say, I have hired people who didn't have that because they explained to me very well in their cover letter why they were applying. I have hired any number of students who ended up working for us permanently who thought they wanted to be environmental lawyers and then did a 1L internship in that and realized they love the environment, but that wasn't their calling, which is sort of, I think, what leads them to Alaska. But they're great lawyers. They realized they were more people persons and they wanted to represent people. So I guess first I look at the resume and I want to see if there is some sort of public interest. And then I want to see a good explanation in the cover letter about what interests you about criminal defense, what draws you, why do you think you want to try that? And again, and you can explain if you don't have that, anything like that on your resume. We've also hired people who did prosecutorial internships the first time. And the reason why, and I know some agencies don't do that, frankly, but the reason why I do that is I understand that everyone has a different journey. And sometimes you don't know until you try something that's really not for you. And so I've hired people who say, because they will say in the cover letter and explain to me, I thought I wanted to be a prosecutor, and then I tried it and I realized that is not who I am and that's not where I want to be. And we certainly have people who we've had on our staff for extremely long time who thought they wanted to be prosecutors. Some of them we hired off the prosecutor's office here and then realized that really wasn't who they are or what they wanted to do, how they wanted to spend their life. So really, I just need a very good explanation succinctly of why this is what you want to do. And one note to the wise, and I'm not thinking that anyone here would do this, but last week I got an application from someone and their cover letter and resume had all sorts of typos, which is like, why would I ever interview someone like that? I mean, so when you do a resume, look it over, have someone else look it over. You can't have it looked over enough times, but typos on a resume that's like a non-starter. The other non-starter for me, frankly, is I have interviewed a few people who did do their 1L summer during prosecutors and in a prosecutor office, and then said to me, well, I ultimately want to be a prosecutor, but I just want to see what the other side is like. And I'm thinking to myself, why would I help train a prosecutor? Like, we don't want to spend our resources that way. That's just strange. So yeah, think about really, why you want to apply for a summer spent as a public defender and give a good explanation.
Sharon, can I ask you a question on the posting? Since it was posted in the fall, it has expired in our system. And I want to make sure I extend that. It just expired at the end of December.
I should explain, I hire a lot of interns, so we do it just until it's filled, which often can be through March. So
okay, so it's still active.
So if you could activate it.
Yes, I have it up right now, and I put all the job numbers in the chat for the students. So the job number I put for Alaska Public Defender is correct. I'm just going to extend the expiration. I'll do it to maybe the end of March. Does that sound good?
That would be great.
Okay.
I will say we only have 2 spots open, so who knows what will happen, but yeah. And one other note for anyone else who might be out there, if you're thinking of applying with us for a 2L summer, submit an application in September because locations go out on a first come, first served basis. And this year I'd already hired 20 people by the end of November, which is sort of stunning, but yeah, I don't know if that's because I don't know exactly why, but there you go, but apply early. Thanks.
And I'll give a plug for Alaska in the summer too. I spent a summer in college working on a fishing boat in Alaska, and there is no place better to be in the summer than Alaska.
And I also actually went to Alaska to clerk right after law school. Alaska's great. Not that Oregon isn't great, but I was a Navy brat. I've lived all over the nation, and in Alaska, and particularly Alaska summers, because it's light all the time. You can literally leave work at 5, fly out and fish, come back, go play softball, still be going at midnight, and it's still light. It's truly astonishing up there. And one thing I will point out is, you know, if you don't get the first job or so you apply for, I mean, as a public defender, as Connor said, there was no spot in Multnomah County. He went to Pendleton for a year and then he came back to Multnomah County. We have several attorneys in our office who applied 2 or 3 times before they were hired. So, you know, if you get denied the first time round, don't assume it's not because they didn't want you. It may just be because they didn't have funding or the position there. If it's what you want to do, well, find a place where you can go and then keep pushing to have the position that you want. And it will, you know, it can come about eventually.
Yeah, and I really echo that. I wanted to work in Portland. I grew up in Portland. I'm from Portland, but there just weren't any openings. And I went to Pendleton, and you know, it's kind of the wild. It still is kind of the Wild West in Pendleton. And you know, I was very quickly given felony cases and got a tremendous amount of experience and responsibility right away. And I loved living in Pendleton for a year. I didn't want to spend my life there, but you know, I would really encourage you, if the places you want to live, you know, Eugene, Portland are full because they're in demand. You know, go somewhere else. You'll get a tremendous amount of experience. You may even end up liking it. I mean, I had colleagues who were like me and were in Pendleton, and thought, well, I'll come out here to Pendleton, get a little experience, and you know, 15 however years ago it was, they're still there, not because they're stuck there, because they decided they liked it. So I would really encourage you to apply to a variety of places.
Thank you, everyone. Given the time, I think I'll open it up to student questions so we can make sure we answered those. And I have some other questions I can ask if people don't have anyone. So if you're a student, you wanna raise your hand, and if you have a question, and we'll call on you. All right, Kara.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kara. I'm a 2L. I'm not exactly sure how to word this question, but listening to everybody talk about kind of what you look for in applications, like, you know, public service and the desire to like represent underrepresented people and all of these things, I struggle with writing cover letters sometimes because we have this very rigid kind of monotone way we're supposed to apply to jobs. And it's, you know, we all kind of sound the same and all of our cover letters look the same. And so I guess I'm wondering, how do you balance that with writing a more personal cover letter saying all those things with still kind of fitting this idea that we're supposed to write the cover letter a certain way? I'm not sure if that makes 100% sense, but that's kind of what I'm wondering about, how you get that information across while still writing that, you know, very strict cover letter that the legal profession requires.
I had some thoughts. I think you can be professional and be personal all at the same time. I don't think it has to be this very stock letter because, you know, like I said, we all want to know, why are you interested? So you can frame it and bring in personal things about yourself. I mean, I think those two things can be combined. Because if it's too stock, it's just not interesting and we don't really know anything about you.
Yeah, I wouldn't be terribly worried about like precise stock legal form. I mean, a public defender's office is sort of the last place that is beholden to like rules. You know, it's a bunch of paid anarchists. So, you know, I wouldn't be afraid to deviate a little bit from the standard letter.
And I hired for the law firm that I owned with my partner, and I've been on hiring committees. And I can tell you that as a public defender, the last thing I want to see is a letter that also could have gone to any law firm in the county. If you want a job, you write an individual letter for that job, and you show that you know what that job is and you want to do that job and why. And in terms of expressing interest in public service, that crosses any number of spectrums. I mean, I've seen individuals that we are very interested in who did things like volunteer at the local food bank, worked at a girls' home, you know, when they were in high school, worked at a shelter for abused women. I mean, the concepts of, you know, showing that you have an interest in serving the underserved and marginalized community. There is a wealth of possibilities that demonstrate demonstrate that. It doesn't have to be, you know, I've already engaged with social work or I've already done that. It's just something that shows that this is a community that you care about.
There have been a few times where I've interviewed someone and I didn't really get from their cover letter exactly I could tell they were interested in public defense enough to get an interview, but then in the interview, something came out that really showed why that person was so dedicated to public defense and public interest. And I would say if you have some very personal anecdote that you're willing to share, put that in your cover letter, because that's going to pull in the organization and really want to make them interview you. I bet there's people who didn't get interviews because their cover letters didn't convey that, who had something like that and they just didn't put it in there because they felt really beholden to this form type of cover letter. So yeah, I would say you can be professional and keep the professional format that the law school wants you to use and that people expect to see, but you can put really personal, compelling stuff in there. And I think that's just all the better for your chances of getting an interview.
Thanks, everyone. Next, we have a question from Serena.
Hi, I actually have two questions. So my first is for the Lane County Public Defender's Office job. I know that that job for summer can lead into a 2L position. And I just wanted to verify the summer position is not paid, if I'm correct. Would the 2L position be paid?
So we will work with law students to get funding. Sometimes we can get them funding through OLSPIF, sometimes other types of funding. So I think typically with our office, you can expect to have some kind of funding for the summer position. The law clerk positions that summer students will sometimes often stay on for, those are paid hourly by our office. So we know exactly where the funding for those comes from. It's the summer ones that sometimes it comes from OLSPIF, sometimes it comes from elsewhere, but we'll work with you to get some kind of funding for the summer.
Thank you. And my next question is kind of for anybody. From what I can see, we're all still on Zoom, so it looks like everybody's home. I guess like the Alaska position and the recommendation that we look at positions throughout the country, especially in rural areas for openings. Is there any type of knowledge of whether or not that would be remote or in person? I don't know if I've really gotten a clear picture of that yet.
For us, even last summer, I had hired 20 interns, and then most of them didn't come either because, life changed, right? But we actually had, I think we had 9 interns total, and only one of them worked virtually. So we ended up having interns in our Anchorage, Fairbanks, Dillingham, and Juneau offices. And like in Anchorage, I think the 4 interns decided to bubble together, but they were either working remotely or in and out of the office. So we're actually intending on everyone coming up here this summer. And, I guess we've all learned that important lesson that life is entirely unpredictable. So who knows? But I think even if people, my guess is by this summer, it'll be either in the office or quasi in the office. We'll have to see. But or in and out of the office. But hopefully things will be different this summer. But we are intending to have people come up here.
Yeah, and I think at the federal defenders, it's still sort of up in the air. I suspect it'll be sort of a combination of in-office time with working at home. But I don't know that for sure because it's unpredictable. So it depends how vaccinations go. So.
Yeah. Because for us, our office, we have a skeleton crew, we have attorneys, and everybody's on different priority levels for vaccines. So we have no idea. Currently, our law clerks, I think, are mostly working remote, but who knows? And I will plug Dillingham. Dillingham's great fun. I spent several weeks in Dillingham and had a really good time.
'Cause I really love the idea of looking into rural areas, but my main concern is the financial burden of actually getting there and staying there. So I guess I'm wondering if I should let that limit my options, or if there might be some remote options that can kind of work with me and figuring something out.
There are a lot of institutions that, particularly for law school students, that will help to fund your summer. It's kind of like scholarships. I know that my law school, had grants you could apply for, and I'm assuming that U of O has that as well. So you could apply for grants to go work at a public interest agency over the summer, and those grants included getting their food, living, things like that. I wouldn't I'd first get the job and then I'd find a way to fund it. Let me put it that way.
And I will say we pay for round trip airfare, or else we'd never get anyone coming up here to any location. Although living here can be expensive. And I echo what Renee just said. There's funding out there. And another national organization is Equal Justice Works, which provides public interest intern scholarships. But I think you have to, I don't know what their deadlines are, but that's something to look at.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from students? We're almost close to our time. I did have one question for the panelists then, is whether if you could talk a little bit more about the interview process for law clerks, and particularly, if a student should prepare for hypotheticals, that can be I know that that's a little more common with the actual attorney hires, but just was wondering if you could touch on that, because how students should prepare for those, if there's something unique and specific to criminal defense that they should know.
I'll just say ours is really basic, but for our interviews, I know people like to know this ahead of time because it can be stressful wondering what an interview is going to be like. We don't ask you any law school exam questions or any questions about cases or the law. That's something we expect you to really learn over the summer. We don't usually do hypos with summer law student interviewees. We just typically have a 30-minute conversation, and we want to get to know you and figure out why you are interested in working at our office specifically. And we also kind of want to make sure, I think Sharon, maybe someone said, we don't want you to be a shrinking violet. We want to make sure you're someone who can seek out help or seek out work in our office if you need it, because although we try hard to supervise the summer students, a lot of it is you have to kind of take matters into your own hands and feel comfortable going to an attorney you're working with and say, I don't understand this part of this task, or I don't have enough work, or I have too much work. We want you to be able to advocate for yourself, and both when you need more work or when you need less work. So those are the kind of things we're trying to suss out. So nothing you need to study for.
I think the same is true of our office. Jessica Snyder, who is currently on maternity leave, is the one who typically in charge of law school hiring, law clerk hiring. But I would be highly doubtful if she ever asks any questions like, please explain to me how, this person's confrontation rights either were violated or not violated. It's more a getting to know you, finding out your motivations, those sorts of things.
And we're much the same. If you're applying for an internship, I will interview you, and it's always on the phone because I'm in Alaska, unless for some reason I've traveled for some job fair, which I usually just do on the big one on the East Coast, the Equal Justice Works. But it's sort of like the same as the letter. Mostly be prepared to explain, why do you want this internship? Like, that's really the most important thing, because it really is, we're trying to find out about you. We want to know, why do you want to do this? What's your motivation? I will say one additional thing is, I always want to know why people want to come to Alaska. And part of that is important for me because, like, for instance, I go to this Equal Justice Works job fair, and I'm usually receive like ridiculous amount of applications, and they're all stellar, but some of those people are just applying to every single public defender agency, and I don't know if they have any interest in coming to Alaska. So be prepared for that. But those are just, so there's no scholarship preparation. Just think about the type of basic interview questions that you'll get.
I'll just add briefly, this usually we do in-person interviews, but last year we did them by Zoom, and I expect they'll be by Zoom again this year. So that's what you can expect for our interviews.
Great. Okay, we're a little bit over the time, so just any last minute questions? All right, well, seeing none, I want to thank the panelists very much for your time and for sharing your experiences and your advice and wisdom to our students.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks
Bye,
a lot.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Zara. Tell everybody hi.
I will.
you.
Bye. Good to see you.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet everyone.
Nice to meet you all virtually.
Nice to meet you.
I want to come to Alaska.
I know, me too. I'm sold. I've never been.
Me either.
Sounds good. I'm going to turn the recording off.